Again, welcome everyone to our 2022 Spring Grant Workshop at RISCA. Next slide, please, Anissa. Again, I'm Todd Trebor. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the organization's program director at RISCA. I'll tell you a bit more about the programs that I manage in a minute. My colleagues Molly Flanagan and Nisa Roof are here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves later when they start speaking, so we'll be sharing the presentation work of this presentation. So first off, we wanted to let you know a little bit about who RISCA is, for those of you who might not be as familiar. We are a state arts agency. We are supported by both funds from taxpayers in Rhode Island from the state legislature, as well as funds from the National Endowment for the Arts. We provide grants, technical assistance, and staff support to artists and arts and culture organizations, community centers, social service organizations, and local governments throughout Rhode Island to support and bring arts and cultural activities and experiences to the Rhode Island public and Rhode Island residents. Next slide, please, Anissa. So the grants that we award are for arts and cultural activities in the following areas. So arts and cultural activities done by any nonprofit organization, doesn't have to be an arts and culture nonprofit, individual artists in the education sphere, folk and traditional arts, as well as arts and culture in a healthcare setting. In our grant programs, arts and culture is always at the center. We are an arts and culture funder, and we fund arts and culture projects and programs. As you can imagine, that has been important to point out as time has gone on, just to clarify any confusion for folks. Next slide, please, Anissa. So we're going to focus today just on the grants that are open now. We have a fair amount of grants that we offer as an agency. The ones that have an April 1st deadline coming up are our community engaged project grants and our Make Art grants, both of which are for individual artists. We also have a project grant in healthcare at the April 1st deadline, as well as project grants for organizations that are open to any nonprofit organization or fiscally sponsored organization, and then general operating support for organizations. Next slide, please. So the funding cycle, our April 1st deadline is to support projects or work that happen between July 1st of 2022 and June 30th of 2023. So activities happening in the state's upcoming fiscal year. The October 1st deadline is for projects or activities that occur between January 1st of 2023 and June 30th of 2023. So activities happening in the latter half of the state's fiscal year. If you all apply and receive a grant at the April 1st deadline of this year, or at the October 1st deadline of this year, you will have a final report that is due. Those final reports are due by July 30th of 2023. So a month after the state's next fiscal year begins, right? Next slide, please.
Okay.
And Molly can take this one away.
I'm Molly. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the individual artist program director at the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. So I deal with all things for individual artists. So this is a big grant workshop for me and a big grant season for me because my grants are brand new this year. So if you've applied in the past and you're expecting to hear about the same grants that you've applied for in the past, surprise, those are all gone now. So we have in their place, we have 4 grants. I'm only going to be talking about the 2 that are open for the April 1st deadline. The first is a community engaged project grant. So this is sort of what the project grants for individuals has morphed into. So it is grants of $500 to $3,000 for projects that directly and actively engage Rhode Island residents in making, experiencing, or learning about art, with an emphasis on active two-way engagement. So things like performing a show and having an audience no longer would qualify for this grant, but things like teaching a workshop or creating in some sort of participatory way would. In the grant guidelines, there are examples of projects that would qualify, and I'm dropping the link directly to the grant guidelines into the chat. Next slide. Okay, and the Make Art grant is as deceptively simple as it sounds. It's grants of $500 to $3,000 for artists to create or continue specific artwork in any discipline. There is no expectation or requirement to do any public performance or public showing or complete the work, but there is a requirement within the grant application to set specific project goals. So it's not just $3,000 to work on whatever you're going to work on. You have to have a specific project and a specific plan that you're proposing. And I will say, based on applications so far and what I'm hearing, did I drop that? Yes, that this will be very competitive. So be prepared for that. Okay, next slide. And then the other big differences for my individual artist grants is that, and these are all things that are just specific to individual artist grants. We're no longer going to be doing partial awards. So if you apply for $3,000, you will either get $3,000 or get $0. Or if you apply for $1,000, you'll either get $1,000 or $0. Our grant program period is only 6 months. So we've split the year up into 2. So if you're applying at the April 1st deadline, your grant program period is July 1st, 2022 through December 31st, 2022. Then if you apply at the October 1st deadline, the grant period is July 1st, 2020, January 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2023. And then all of the final reports will still be due that July 31st. Here's the good news. The application is much shorter than it used to be and much more streamlined. So that's, it's 3 narrative questions and that's it. And then there's also a timeline and a budget and that sort of stuff. And then a reminder that these projects must be artist initiated outside of the support and structure of a nonprofit or other institutions. So this means if AS220 is booking you for a show in their gallery, you cannot also apply for funding support through the individual artist grants for that same project, right? Because that's supported by a nonprofit or another institution. And then PGIs and fellowships are no more. So those are not coming back. They are gone. They won't be at another cycle. So don't be looking for those. And next slide, please. I think we're ready to hand off to Todd.
Thank you, Molly. So next grant program we wanted to talk about was our project grants for organizations. These are grants for up to $3,000 for publicly engaged arts and culture programs that contribute to the vitality of communities, the economy of the state, the arts education of Rhode Islanders, and our quality of life. This is a pretty broad grant category, and it's for organizations to apply for. I'll mention a bit more about in a minute, but it is in essence kind of the sister application or program to the community engaged project grants for individual artists. Next slide, please. So the deadline for this grant program is April 1st or October 1st. You have to be a nonprofit organization, a 501c3 nonprofit to apply, or if you are not a nonprofit, you can be fiscally sponsored by another nonprofit organization. What that means is that the nonprofit submits the application on your behalf. They will receive the funds for you and cut the checks for you. It is a federal government requirement that for funds that are federally sourced, which is true for the Project Grants for Organizations program, that the money go to a 501c3 nonprofit. We take a very liberal view of fiscal sponsorship because we believe that being a nonprofit is just a tax form, and it's just a requirement of the federal government that we have to comply with. But we have plenty of applicants that are fiscally sponsored. You can ask me more about that if you have questions about that. As with Molly's grant programs, this grant program and our other grant program, the organization. Excuse me, if you can, excuse me. Can you all make sure you're on mute, please? Thank you. Please I'll double check and make sure you're on mute. Thank you. these programs were restructured in 2020 and 2021, and the applications have been streamlined and made a bit shorter, and with lots of support options that we'll be mentioning within the applications themselves and outside of those applications as well. Before we go to the next slide, I did want to mention one thing that might help you on conceptualizing whether or not you have a project that is aligned for this program. This program, as I said, is very broad, and it's for any kind of nonprofit organization doing an arts and culture program. So it could be that you want to put on a festival, a cultural festival in the summer where thousands of people attend. It could be that you want to work with a social service nonprofit to do a music class for kids at that social service nonprofit. Even though it's very few people, it's still a publicly engaged project. A festival with thousands of people obviously is a publicly engaged project. So the intention is for this to be very broad again. So if you have questions about the suitability of your project, you can reach out to me about that. Next slide, please. And again, there's someone not on mute. So if everyone just check and make sure you are on mute, I'd appreciate that. So as I said prior about fiscal sponsorship, any nonprofit, if you're not a nonprofit organization, can function as a fiscal sponsor. For those of you who have applied to RISCA grants before, 3 years ago, it was the case that if an organization was receiving funding from RISCA, either through a project grant program or the general operating support program, they could not also be a fiscal sponsor. That is now not the case. So organizations that are in our communities that typically fiscally sponsor, like AS220, I know does it often, Wilberry Theater Group, they're in our general operating support program. Typically, they can function as fiscal sponsors for RISCA grant programs. We just want to make sure that information is out there. As long as it says that they are not program partners in the sponsored project, right? If they're not involved in the execution of the project, they can be the fiscal sponsor. If you're a nonprofit working with a nonprofit on a project, then the nonprofit has to be the applicant if they are a program partner. The reason why we made this change is because we recognized through conversations with our communities that having the requirement of being a nonprofit to apply was a barrier, particularly for communities of color, but also rural communities as well, where there's not a large amount of nonprofit organizations that can function as fiscal sponsors in certain communities. Next slide, please. Our general operating support for organizations program, the deadline for that program is April 1st. There's a lot of requirements for this program, as is the case with general operating support program, so I'm not going to go into hyper detail here. But I will say that to be eligible for this program, you have to be either a nonprofit arts and culture organization or culturally specific organization, or you have to be a arts and culture organization or culturally specific organization that is fiscally sponsored. We allow fiscally sponsored organizations into this program. If they have budgets under $50,000 a year, they can be fiscally sponsored. The main requirement that you all need to be aware of is that in order to be eligible for the general operating support for organizations program, you need to have applied for and received a high panel score on 3 project grants for organizations or project grants for education applications in 3 consecutive years. So once a year for 3 years, you need to score at least an 83 or above adjusted panel score in the panel room to be eligible for the general operating support program. This is very typical for state arts agencies to have an entry grant program into their general operating support program, because that way organizations are reviewed by more than one panel before they're reviewed for general operating support, which is us doing our due diligence as a funder stewarding taxpayer money. There's only the requirement of 2 grants in 2 consecutive years if your organization fits our definition of being a BIPOC-centered organization, or if your organization is based in a town or city that is unrepresented in the general operating support program. And that is listed on the guidelines for general operating support, what that means, both what it means to be an unrepresented town or city, as well as what it means to be a BIPOC-centered organization. So you can check there for more information. These grants are 3-year grants. You apply in the year in which you become eligible. And then should you get into the program, you then can reapply in the year in which organizations of your budget size are being reviewed by panels, right? I think that's it on that one. We can answer more questions about all these things when we get to the question and answer session at the end of this presentation portion of the workshop. Next slide, and I think it's going to someone else now.
Hi, my name is Anissa. I go by she, her. I am the Arts and Health Coordinator at the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. I'm here to talk about the Project Grants in Healthcare, which is a smaller grant category. It has two deadlines, April 1st, which is now, and the October 1 deadline. This grant gives out grants up to $9,000. You can ask for less. And it is for nonprofit or fiscally sponsored healthcare organizations. And as Todd just described the details about what it means to be a fiscally sponsored organization, some of that applies here as well. This grant is for teaching artists that need to partner with a licensed healthcare staff to implement the project, but the actual grantee will be the nonprofit or fiscally sponsored healthcare organization. It supports projects that promote and facilitate individual health and healing through participatory arts engagements as a primary focus of the project. The arts activities may occur in hospitals or other healthcare settings, such as hospices, community healthcare agencies, and it can also incorporate professional development components for the healthcare staff. This grant also, it suggests that it aligns with the Arts and Health Plan that was developed a few years ago. So it can also discuss, the projects can relate to patient care, education, community well-being, healing environments, and care for the actual caregivers or staff at any of these facilities. There is a cash match requirement for this grant. You have to have a one-to-one match, and 25% of that match can be in kind. For example, it can be part of the salary from the participating healthcare providers figured in as far as and donations. And you can also have other in-kind contributions. And there's details about that in the guidelines, which I know Molly will be dropping links in to the chat, or if she hasn't already.
It's already there.
Thank you. And if anybody have any questions about this grant project, I'm happy to answer that later. And again, this is for, the applicant is the healthcare facility and not the artist, but the artist can drive this application and partner up with a facility. So, and this grant program right now is actually undergoing an overhaul process. So as this grant program is open, we're rethinking and revisiting how this grant program can best serve the community and thinking about what it looks like. But for the next two grant cycles, the April 1 and October 1, the guidelines will stay as they are. And then for the new fiscal year, in 1 year, there will be a new project grants in healthcare. So. And I think this is Molly.
Sure.
Okay.
So as you all know, we also have a number of other grant programs and application programs that don't have April 1st deadlines. This includes the Rhode Island Expansion Arts Program, Folk Arts Fellowships and Apprenticeships, which will be at the October 1 deadline, the Teaching Artist Roster, which is at the July 1st, Big Yellow School Bus and Artist Open Studio Tour are currently open and have rolling deadlines. The new Opportunity Grant will have also a rolling deadline, and it will open on June 15th. General Operating Support for Artists, which will open for applications on May 1st with the July 1st deadline, and Project Grants for in Education, which will have an October 1st deadline this year. And you can peruse all of our grants on our grants page, which I just dropped into the chat.
So I'm going to go over the application process at RISCA. So here are the 5 initial steps we tell everyone. First off, read the grant guidelines. We recommend you read them twice. And we're not doing that to be obnoxious. We're doing that to save time for when you actually meet with us. You know, especially this cycle because of the new grant programs, the fact that we don't have an executive director, XYZ being in this phase of the pandemic, we're more strapped for time to talk with people one-on-one. So we want to be sure that we get to the questions that can't be answered by the guidelines rather than having you all ask us questions that are apparent to you on the guidelines and therefore wouldn't be an efficient use of your time. Then we suggest talking to a staff member if you would like to, if you wish to, and if there's a time and space to do so. Then if you're a new applicant to RISCA, you're going to want to create a profile on Fondant, which is RISCA's online grant system. Note that there are 2 different portals for the online grant system, one for organizations and one for individual artists. The way that you can figure out which one is the right one to go to, just click on the link that's in the grant program that you're interested in applying for, and it'll take you to the appropriate grant portal for you to set up your profile. You're then going to want to write the application and gather support materials. I'll say right now that a lot of what many people do, at least for project grants for organizations, is they'll go in and see what the questions are. You can see both on the website, on the grant profile pages, there are copies of PDF versions of the questions for the application that you can download there. You're also able to print out a question list within the applications themselves in the grant system. So that way you can work on the questions offline on a Word document maybe, then that way you have it saved and archived and you just kind of cut and paste them into the application as you're working on it. You're going to want to also gather support materials, particularly with some of the new grant programs. There's less narrative questions, but there's more support material opportunities. Really do take advantage of those. Molly is going to share later on some tips for what to think about when assembling support materials. You're then going to want to hit the submit button before the deadline, and we really mean before the deadline of 11:59 p.m. on April 1st. We do not take applications late. It would cause a lot of chaos if we did. So be sure you hit submit well in advance of that deadline, because we have it happen every year that someone hits it and it's 11:59 on their computer, but maybe not in the Fondant system, whatever. So at least hit submit by 11:50, I'd say, if not dramatically earlier than that. And then you're going to wait. We'll talk about what happens when you wait in a moment. Next slide, please. So the review and notification process. So this is what happens during the time when you're waiting. We're all just busy little bees at RISCA. So first off, the staff at RISCA, the staff associated with your given grant program, reviews all the applications that have been submitted for eligibility and completeness. We will reach out to you during that time if there are issues that we see in regards to eligibility, particularly for project grants for organizations and general operating support. So there's a lot of documents that unfortunately have to be submitted when you're granting out taxpayer money. Panelists review the application. So we're going to assemble panels. We'll talk about that in a moment as well. Panelists will review the application and recommend funding. Again, we'll get to that in a moment. After they've done that work, the staff writes up panel notes about each application, the reflections that panels had on applications. The council then reviews the panel's recommendations for funding and approves those recommendations. When they're approved and the state budget is passed for the next fiscal year, we will tell you whether or not you received a grant. So you can expect that with the April 1st deadline, you will hear about whether or not you received a grant 1 week after the state budget passes. So in a normal year, which when has that ever happened? In a normal year, the state budget passes the end of June. So typically you would hear about whether or not you received a grant award around the 4th of July or after, but just be aware of that. That's the factor, because these grants are using next fiscal year's money, right? So we can't announce them until we know what money we have. So again, we tell you, we will mail you a check. So what'll happen is when you get an announcement that you've got an award, you'll be excited, you'll kick off your shoes and dance around a bit, maybe if you're able. And then you will want to go in and sign a grant agreement form and do payment registration process that we'll talk about. And after that, once you've done those things, it will take about 8 to 12 weeks for you to receive a check in the mail from the state. Particularly in this moment we're in the pandemic with staffing at the state, we've seen that payments are taking a bit more time than they typically do. You then do the project, and then you report back to us via a final report that, as we mentioned, the final reports are always due July 31st. So for this grant cycle, if you got a grant, your final report would be due July 31st of 2023. Next slide, please. So after you get the grant, I gave you a little bit sneak preview on the prior slide. You're going to read and follow the instructions in your award email, which means, as I said, filling out the grant agreement form and registering with Ocean State Procures, which is a state payment system. We can't send you the money until you do those things. And the way it works for us is we're embedded within the Department of Administration. We don't handle the payment processes. They happen in another office. We simply initiate them. And that's why you have to go through Ocean State Procures. You can ask your program director if you receive questions about the panel comments. So we feel that one of the things that we offer of value to the Rhode Island arts and culture community is the panel process and panel feedback on projects. Many applicants take these very seriously and to heart, and will think about those comments and adjust their future programs in light of getting that feedback. And a program director can kind of help walk you through that feedback and highlight the things that they might think are important or particularly noteworthy in the panel's feedback. You want to communicate with your program director after you get a grant if there's any changes you're making to your project. If you need to delay it, if you need to change it, even slightly, be sure to just reach out and let the program directors know. We can let you know if that goes outside the parameters of the grant at all or what's acceptable, but we're here to work with you on that. And 98% of the time, it's something that's totally fine. We can work with you on. Let us know what's happening. So let us know what projects you're doing and send us information about it so we can maybe put it on our Facebook and blog. I will also say here, and I'm going to say this for the rest of my life as I work with this agency, you absolutely want to tell the state legislators in your district that your project is happening. We are granting out state and federal money. You'll want to let the legislators know in your district that there's amazing arts and culture activity happening there, and that taxpayer money is going to support that. All right. A lot of people talk to us about how we can advocate for the arts and culture community. We definitely can educate. That's part of what we do as an agency, and we can support your advocacy, but we as a state agency cannot advocate, but we want you to let everyone know the awesome stuff you're doing, okay? And then lastly, ask us questions. We're here to support you throughout the process, not just up until application, but beyond. In terms of the project and how you execute it. But we're also here, as you heard at the beginning, to just be resources for you in general, for information, for connections, to have friendly cups of coffee or tea when scenarios are safe for that to happen. All right. Next slide, please. So if you don't get the grant, and this happens depending on programs, some programs have a 40% award rate, some programs have less. You're going to want to ask, or you can ask your program director if you want to review the panel comments and get more feedback. Again, we're here to help you and help you write a better grant application the next time. We start having meetings about the next grant deadline, typically as soon as the grants open. So what that means is for the April 1st deadline, we typically start having meetings after February 1st. For the October 1st deadline, we typically start having meetings after August 1st. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, depending on the competitive nature of the grant program, we see about 40 to 50% of applicants receive a grant or less. And again, it varies per program. I'm speaking specifically about project grants for organizations when I think about that number. It is very common for project grants to be partially funded. If you are partially funded, you can and should scale it back to keep it within spirit of what you proposed. You also, if your partial award is not enough for you to do the program in even a modified form, you can decline the grant. It's totally fine. Nothing bad is happening. Partial funding, the reason why that's a thing, first off, we have panels I'm going to talk about in a moment who make funding recommendations. They want to fund as many projects happening around the state. We're a state agency, right? So one of the ways they can accomplish that is by offering more partial grant awards than full grant awards. I'll just speak for project grants for organizations, which used to be the name of, used to be called Arts Access. Again, as I said, in that particular program, typically we see about 40 to 50% of the applicants receive a grant award. Only about 5 to 10% of them receive a full grant award. So again, the majority are going to be partial awards. Next slide, please. Panelists, I've been teasing you about talking about panelists, and here we go. So as noted, panels operate slightly differently based on grant programs. In the majority of the scenarios, this is how it works. There are 5 panelists for each grant panel for project grants specifically. They are Rhode Island residents with some kind of arts and culture involvement. They work at an arts and culture organization. They work at an organization that just happens to do arts and culture programming. They're an artist, they're a parent of a young person who takes art classes, they're an arts appreciator, etc. We assemble the panels with an eye to diversity in many forms. So gender, geographic location they hail from within the state of Rhode Island, race, ethnicity, kind of arts and culture involvement, etc. Again, we're a state agency, so we really try to get statewide, or we do get statewide representation on every panel that we have. Panels are different every grant cycle. So if you have a conversation with us about your grant program proposal or application, you might hear us say things like, yeah, I think that would do well in front of a panel, or yeah, that would be viable in front of a panel. We're always just guessing, right? We understand the programs because we manage them, because we develop the guidelines in conversation with our communities. But the decision making is not up to RISCA staff at all. We don't make decisions. We facilitate the discussions. That's it. We're not allowed to insert our opinions. So we're always kind of just thinking about trends that we've seen in panels, in panel rooms, and thinking about how an application will do based on our aggregated experience in these different panel rooms. As it says, decisions vary based on compositions of panel, obviously, right? And again, just to emphasize that we as staff do not make funding decisions, which is great, so we can be as involved in supporting you in the application process as possible, because we're alleviated from that challenging burden with so many wonderful things, arts and culture-wise, happening in Rhode Island. Next slide, please. So the panelist process. So remember, when you're waiting, you submitted your application, we're busy as bees. And one of the things that we do is we invite and select panelists. Again, we assemble them with those considerations in mind in terms of diversity and representation. The panelists receive guidelines and a training packet. The training that they receive is, they get the same information you all get, basically. And we'll talk more about the workshops that are coming up that are program specific. The panelists receive the application via an online grant system, right? So they basically have a login that logs them into the grant system, and they can see everything in a different view than you all can as applicants. The panelists then review and pre-score applications at home. We estimate that panelists spend approximately 30 minutes per application and are scoring anywhere between 20 to 35 applications. For our high volume application programs like project grants for organizations, community engaged project grants, and others, because I'll just speak for project grants for organizations, I typically get between 60 and 70 applications at the April 1st deadline, which means I have to have more than one panel. I have between 2 and 3, and I randomly assign those applications to panels using a randomizing software that's available on the interwebs. We say this to you all to put in your heads now. You want to be cognizant of both how much you're writing and then on the length of your support materials. I don't want to steal Molly's thunder. She'll talk more about that later. So the panelists have usually about 4 to 6 weeks to review applications. They then meet for an all-day in-person, either physically in person or via Zoom review session. They discuss each application. Before they go into the panel room that day, they've pre-scored the application, and we pull their pre-scores. When they meet, they discuss each application, usually between 10 and 15 minutes. And then that discussion is the basis of your panel comments. After each discussion, they have the option to privately readjust their pre-scores that they made based on the panel discussion. The total or average scores are tabulated and displayed for panelists at the end of the day. So let's say that this panel has reviewed 30 applications, discussed them over the course of the day. They're excited, but they're a little bit tired. At the end of the day, they're going to see the total or average scores tabulated and displayed for them in descending order of score. So high scoring applications at the top, lower scoring ones at the bottom. The panelists then, following that scoring scheme that they came up with, they then recommend grant awards based on a pot of money that they have and based again on that scoring scheme. So that's where the fun begins for being a panelist, certainly. Next slide, please. That begins, maybe ends. Oh, and this is Molly. Go for it, Molly.
Woo! Back to me. I'm I'm drinking coffee right now, so I'm like extra pep. Okay, so Todd already covered this. We've moved into the grant tips and tricks section of this workshop. So Todd already covered this, but we'll cover it again because it's very important. We cannot accept late applications. And as Todd said, every single grant cycle, the next morning, all of us walk in. Well, we don't walk into the office anymore. We walk into wherever we're working from home and open up our email. And there's always a couple of people, it's never just one, saying, oh, I had technical difficulties. Oh, I clicked submit at 11:58, but it didn't, it said it was closed. We can't accept late applications. The grant portal closes and we can't get them through. So make sure you hit submit before the deadline. I'll now also say we go home, and by home, I mean, I'll walk, 15 feet that way to the couch instead of in my little living room cubicle. At around 5 or 6 p.m. on the deadline day. I will say, don't rely on this, but Todd and I are relatively good at checking our email up until about 9 p.m. on the deadline day. We have a history of working late on the deadline day, but don't count on that. We'll do our best, but no promises. We're definitely, if you're emailing us in a panic at 11:50 p.m., all of us are asleep. And I will also say the application portal closes at 11:59 p.m. and will not accept your submission at 11:59 and 1 second. I wish that it would accept applications up until midnight, but that's just the way the portal is. So I would say latest you're hitting submit is 11:50 p.m. Very, very strongly advise you to hit submit at 4 p.m. Just because technical issues always happen and we just can't make exceptions. Next slide, please. Okay, so Todd has already covered this, but I'll say this again. And if any of y'all have attended any of the grant workshops I've given anywhere in the last 5 years, you will know that I always drop this statistic. Thoroughly read and follow the directions. Here is the thing. Approximately 50% of the applications I receive have not completely followed the directions. So if you've completely read and followed all of the directions, you're already better off than 50% of the other applicants. And this is not unique to RISCA. This is not unique to individual artists writing grants, right? Like it's not your job. You are not a professional grant writer. That's not unique to us. That's across pretty much all grant making that I've ever talked to any funder is like, yep, we're taking, giant $1 million grant applications from hospitals. They didn't follow the directions. So that's not about you. That's just general for all grants ever. Thoroughly read and follow the directions. Please, 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 please. Next slide, please. Okay, after you've done the following of the directions, here are some other ways that you can do awesome at grant writing. Firstly, be excited about your project. Particularly at RISCA, everybody who's on a panel already starts with the idea that art is valuable, art is important, art is essential to our lives in Rhode Island, right? Everybody that's reading your grants at RISCA believes in the power and the importance of art. You don't need to convince them of that. All grant panelists are going to start by being excited about your project. And if you're not excited about your project, why are you writing a grant to do it? Maybe you shouldn't. So be excited about your project. Secondly, address the grant applications directly and fully. This is a sneaky follow the directions that we see a lot of times. And I will just say it's not a presidential debate. You don't want to, give your 2-minute policy speech. You want to actually answer the question that's being asked because it's being asked for a really specific reason that's related to the evaluation review criteria and also the evaluation rubric. Have an outsider read your application. remember that, if you are making art in a really specific way, and all of y'all are, right? Like whether you're a jeweler or a musician, you're all doing something that not every artist in all disciplines will deeply understand. So there might not be someone on a 5-person panel that's from your specific artistic discipline or style. So make sure that your application is legible, understandable to someone who doesn't have a deep understanding of your specific discipline or field. And we recommend doing that by having an outsider read your application. This is not the person that's working on the project with you. This is not maybe even your partner that's heard you talk about the project for days and days and days and days and days. This is somebody who isn't super familiar with the project and has a little bit of an outside edge to read it as somebody who's discovering it for the first time. So they can make sure that you are sharing the forest and not just the trees, right? You want to be able to see the full picture. My next tip is to fully address the why of the project. Everybody cares about what the project is and how you're going to do it and making sure you can accomplish it, right? We have a whole grant review criteria about that called feasibility and likelihood of success. But what we also care about is why this project is important. Why is it important to you? Why is it important to the people of Rhode Island? Because remember, public funder. So think about that and make sure you're talking about that. Okay. And then look at the evaluation rubric before you write your application and refer to it throughout the process. The people that are evaluating your applications get the same exact evaluation rubric that is on our website. That is what they're using to score your application. It's right there. So please, please look at it. As a public funder, we really value transparency and putting everything where everyone can see it and making sure everybody gets the same information. So the panelists are going to see the exact same grant guidelines that you see and the exact same evaluation rubric that you see. So those are there for a reason to guide both of y'all, the panelists and the applicants. Next slide. Okay, don't wait for the last minute. It's really hard for us to give you substantive help on the deadline day. We get a lot of applications. We're super busy. We will do our best to help you on the application day if you wait for the last minute, but we can't guarantee it. And particularly with technical issues, with Found It and stuff like that stuff's hard, and none of us are IT people. Don't forget to communicate with your program staffer if you need us. It's literally our job to help you. But again, a lot of other people are also asking us for help. So know that you probably won't get a response in 5 minutes. It might take us a day or two. And then, as Todd mentioned earlier, because we don't make any decisions, we don't get to have any opinions in our positions about your applications. We don't get to decide anything about funding. So we can give you feedback on your application. If you're like, oh man, I'm really struggling with this question, I would really like a program staffer to read it and tell me, we can do that. You can email us, you can sign up for a one-on-one time. You can, those are the main ways. So just know that we're here to help you and we're friendly and we're all helping, we're all working to support first-time grant writers, or if this is your only grant you write every year, like that's our jam, right? This is what we're doing. Next slide, please. Okay, image submissions. As a reminder, art is at the center of everything that we do and everything we fund. We are the State Council on the Arts. So image submissions do matter. A reminder to follow the directions on file size, format, and naming. And this isn't just about images, this is about everything, because our online grant portal has cutoffs, and it's not that we can like go into the back end and download and finagle around. It's just that it won't even be there. We won't be able to do anything. So make sure you're following those directions on file size and format. Otherwise, what you're attaching just might not show up. A reminder that panelists are looking at your applications on the computers at home. So everything now is really done digitally. If the work you're showing is really complex, feel free to include detail shots. These can be, insets into an image, or you can make a PDF for each piece that has multiple images. That's a sneaky way to get around the maximum amount of support materials, which I will talk about in a minute. And then if work is large in scale or really dimensional, include an installation shot. When I'm giving these talks to college classes, I usually show a series of images and I'm like, how big is this? How big is this? Tell me what this looks like in real life. And it's always really wrong, right? It's really hard to see, particularly work that's large or has texture to it on a screen. So make sure you're doing your best to show that work and what it looks like in the place that it's meant to be seen. Next slide. Okay, support materials. So support materials really should exist in your application to help you tell the story of your work, your project, and your organization. They really need to support the application that you're submitting. So make sure they directly relate to and directly support the application you're actually submitting. Remember your audience, which is folks that are reading a bunch of applications, up to 30. And so they shouldn't be super long or super detailed, right? And they should get to the point. Remember that these are folks that do have some involvement in the arts ecosystem. And remember that they're going to be friendly, and primarily they're going to be Rhode Island residents. That's not completely the case for general operating support grants, both for artists and for organizations and for the Make Art grant, but primarily, particularly for the project grants for organizations, community engaged project grants, and project grants in healthcare. They're all going to be Rhode Islanders. And then relate back to the review criteria. Those review criteria are shared with you so that you can present the best application that you can, and your support materials should be helping to tell the story of your application, but also relating to the review criteria in some way. Next slide. Okay, so these are things that we commonly see as support materials. Letters of support from project partners or spaces that are providing in kind or you're renting from, or folks that have gone through the program before, anybody that's deeply engaged in the project or has been impacted and is excited about the project and can help you tell why this is important to the community. Resumes and CVs of the artists or arts administrators involved. Images and video, right? Remember, we're an arts funder. Press, so any reviews or newspaper articles or other things that you've gotten in the past. It doesn't need to be about the upcoming project, but it can be about the past. Just make sure it's not too many or too long or too far different from what you're applying for. And then marketing collateral. So this could be for the project you're applying for or for past projects, just to show that you have a good marketing plan, know what you're doing on that. Posters, brochures, screenshots of social media, etc. And then the list of quotes. This is frequently seen in the organizational grants and very much less frequently seen in the individual artist grants. But this could be a list of quotes from, say you're running a program for youth that are doing a musical. It could be a list of quotes from family members and caregivers and the youth and maybe the instructors that are about the impact of the program. And then other things that might help support your project. All right, next slide, please. Budget time. All right, y'all. So in the past, you're used to Todd. If you've attended one of these before, you're used to getting a really nice overview of our budget by Todd. This year, we commissioned Jory Ketton to create a short video on how to do our budget. And so I'm just going to play that. But give me one moment. Oh, Anissa has to play it. That's right.
Do I play from here, Molly? I didn't.
Yeah, it's embedded. We should have tested.
Oh,
We didn't test
sorry.
this.
Whoops, sorry. Oh, yikes. Ah. I guess in this mode, Molly, it's not letting me play.
Oh, delightful.
I'm going to stop screen sharing for a moment, maybe
Okay.
to.
I'm here to. I often find budget forms on grant applications intimidating. They're charts that someone else made. They may have language I don't totally understand. Sometimes numbers seem to add themselves together magically. If you're like me, or if you just have a few small questions, hopefully this video will be helpful to you. So this is RISCA's Make Art Grant Budget form. And when you open the form, you can first fill in the name of your project. As you can see, mine is called My Very Cool Project. And then you can skim the form and see what it's asking of you. So you'll notice there's one section called Revenue and another section called Expenses. And that's it. That's the whole form. Revenue is the money that you're taking in as you're doing your project, and expenses is what you're spending, what you're putting out to make the project happen. You'll notice at the bottom of the revenue section, this is where you're going to be asking for RISCA funds. So the RISCA request amount will go in this box here, and that can be up to $3,000. Your budget may actually be more than $3,000 if you have other forms of income, but the maximum you can ask from RISCA is $3,000. I like to start with my expenses, what I know it's going to cost me to make this project happen. For example, I might fill in my artist fees first because that's an important part of any artist project. I'll pay myself and I'll pay collaborators. In the budget notes section, I'll fill in details. So I might say 2 dancers, $1,000 each, project for project fees. If I had an hourly rate, I might write something different. I know I'm going to spend $250 on social media ads. I would write that here. I have a big space rental fee that's going to go here. I might put some details about the space here. I got an insurance quote, and I was going to buy a projector. And I put the projector down here because it's an equipment purchase, which is actually something that RISCA cannot fund, but it's still important to add to my budget so that reviewers can get a sense of what it takes for me to make my work. So now this yellow box down here has added all of these numbers together for my different line items. Anything that's in a row is called a line item. And I see that my expenses are $5,000. The green box here tells me my budget is not in balance. And that just means that my income and my expenses are not currently showing the same dollar amounts. I want the money coming in and the money going out to be the same. And when that's the case, this will tell me that my budget is in balance. So let's see if we can balance the budget. If we go back to the revenue section, we can add some details here. So let's say we planned $500 in ticket pre-sales. It's not a confirmed amount, so I'm not going to put an asterisk, but that's what I'm assuming I'm going to be making. I did already collect tuition for movement workshops. I did already collect this tuition, so I'm going to star that. And I also got a grant from the Department of Art, Culture, and Tourism. Let's star that. And oh, we had a big GoFundMe, so that's here. Great. So I already have $2,500 of income, but my expenses are totaling $5,000. So that's how I know that I need to ask RISCA for $2,500. And now my budget is in balance. Two more things to note. If you're filling out the project grant for organizations form, it's very similar. Some of the line items are different. And in general, when you are filling out either form, if the line items here don't fit your project, you don't have to fill them in. And if there's something that's missing, you can use the other lines here, here, and here. The second thing to know is that there's also 2 narrative questions that you'll be asked to fill out. One of them asks you to explain how you'll be using RISCA funds. So in this case, I'm asking for $2,500, but but I have $4,500 worth of eligible expenses, because remember, $500 of my $5,000 budget is not eligible for RISCA funding. So how will I use that $2,500? Will it be $2,000 for artist fees and $500 of my fee? How will I break it down? That's where you're going to answer that question. The second narrative question is about in-kind donations. What types of community support will you be getting for your project? That might include donations from individuals, such as these GoFundMe donations. It might include donated space or documentation services or food, anything that people are going to show up and volunteer to give to you in the form of goods or services to help make your project happen.
All right. Thanks for your patience. All
So
right.
I'm going to jump in before Anissa talks and say,
Sure.
questions are coming in like 3 slides. So we're just going to drop a bunch of links and tell you how to get more help after this workshop, and then we'll take questions.
Yes. And so I just want to share, as Todd and Molly said, we're here to help you. So we have lots of different ways to for you guys to do that. We're doing workshops like this. We have another workshop coming up. I think Molly's probably putting all the links in the chat, that we have another overview grant writing workshop on March 1st. And then we have drop-in hours for each of the grant programs. Todd will be hosting a couple specifically about individual artist project grants for organizations and general operating support. Molly will be running workshops for the individual artist grants, and I'll be doing one for healthcare. And those are group format workshops for an hour, hour and a half, where just people interested in that particular program can come in. There'll be other people coming in and out where they can answer questions, listen to other people's questions and answers. And those are all listed. Molly will share them, and they're also on our blog. We also offer the opportunity, you can have one-on-one sessions with each of the program directors, so whether with Molly, Todd, or myself. And we have a Sign Up Genius with already slots set up, and you can look at the time, and then that is the opportunity where by Zoom or phone, you can get very specific questions about your application. And as Molly and Todd said, because we're not making any funding decisions, you can ask all kinds of questions, ask about the budget, ask us to review things, really, and that's really helpful. And don't hesitate to look at that one-on-one sessions and sign up for those. We also have, if none of those things fit, you can reach out to us. You know, if the times do not suit your schedule, we know everybody has very different work schedules, family time. Reach out to us. Molly's sharing email addresses. Just contact us, and we can see where we can, or on the guidelines or on our website, people can find our email addresses, and you can just contact us via email is preferable, as we're all working remotely, and then schedule a phone time. And and sometimes it might just be via email. You just have a quick question or want to schedule a quick phone call, you can let us know. And then just a reminder, because as Todd had said, like we have lots of different people asking questions, just give lead time for us to get back to you. If you need other help, we also have Facebook resource groups. And if you're not already members of the art administrators or the artists and creative groups on our Facebook page, you can join the groups. There's lots of information shared with the staff at RISCA, as well as in between the different administrators or artists, things that are happening in the field, specifically here in Rhode Island or nationally. So definitely join that. And this is just an overview of who the staff is and what programs they oversee. You got to meet Todd, Molly, and myself, and then Elena and Maggie are also part of the staff. Their grant programs are just not open at this time. So you can find all this information on our website with contact information.